Yes. It's important. It's important also for us to know that there were other influences that had already become popular in the African American community of Detroit, Michigan. There was a man named Noble Drew. They called him Noble Drew Ali.
Yes.
And he had a movement he called Islam. You know, and he had a Quran he called Quran, but it was not the Quran. It was a little pamphlet, you know, that he wrote himself. And Mr. Farad came behind him, like maybe 2 years behind him. And there was another movement that's very important for us to know about, to see what kind of circumstances shaped even Mr. Farad's idea, you know.
Sure.
There was a black man who had a big black church of hundreds, thousands, maybe he had 1,000 or more followers. And that was big back then in Detroit, Michigan, around 1930. His name, he was called Father Divine. Father Divine.
Right.
And he was very black in color. Yes. And he was tall, big man, very big man. And he told his followers, if you want to see Jesus, look at me, you know. So Mr. Farad knew about this man, knew that this man was saying that Jesus is a black man and I'm Jesus, you know. He was saying I'm Jesus, which is saying I'm God, you know.
Right.
Yes. And another movement is very important to know about. The third one is Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington had also formed his organization, and he was a teacher, educator. He built schools. He used his students, taught them skills, and he used them to build several buildings, 3 or 4 big sized buildings, and there he housed his school. What Mr. Farad took from him was military drill. Most of the high schools had military drill, public schools. They had, you could join the ROTC,
right,
and receive military training, drill. And it was part of disciplining the students. And Booker T. Washington used that very strongly. So Mr. Farad, he created the FOI, gave them military drill. He said God was a black man. And he said you should get into industry. You should take courses like engineering and then go into business and get into industry. Booker T. Washington was insisting upon the same for his students in Tuskegee, Alabama. Yes. So what I want to say is this mysterious man, he didn't get all this from the clouds or from the sky somewhere, you know.
Right.
He saw what was important to African American militants. He didn't want any African American, and he said that. He said, "I don't want Du Bois followers."
Right.
W.E.B. Du Bois. I don't want Du Bois followers, the talented 10th, who are all about trying to integrate into the system of America. He wanted to separate. He wanted those who didn't believe they could ever be integrated, those who had no faith in their future as citizens of America. Those are the ones he attracted. So who did he attract? He attracted Black Masons. He attracted Eastern Star, another secret organization for women. So many of his first followers were from the Eastern Star, women from the African American, black women from Eastern Star, and from Black Masons, and others who were very discontent. They just didn't believe that they had any future in America.
Right. And in the Nation of Islam,
and that was justified by what was going on at that time. 2 laws, one for blacks and one for whites in the South. Segregation, discrimination, both in the South and in the North. Yes.
And I think some of the early philosophy of the Nation of Islam is that black Americans should do for self. And what were some of the early economic plans to get the people in the Nation of Islam involved in trying to generate some income on their own and recirculate it in their own communities?
I must acknowledge that even that wasn't original for us, because Booker T. Washington also said, do for self, lift yourself. He said, pick up your buckets where you are. And if you have a skill, he said, if you can do the white mistress lady's hair, he said, then why don't you open a business and do half for yourself, make money for yourself. So actually Booker T. Washington had that a little ahead of the Nation of Islam, but the Nation of Islam was more effective than all of those organizations. Drew Ali that I mentioned, more effective than the Drew Ali and his followers, more effective than Booker T. Washington and his schools, the vocational schools to educate and train blacks to have a living, and more effective than Father Divine saying he's a black man and he look at me, you see Jesus Christ, and you know, the Nation of Islam was much more powerful. The mysterious man felt he had the ability, the mental ability to pull all those things together and make them work more powerfully to attract blacks and to get blacks motivated to do things for self. I didn't come to have really serious difference with my father and his teachings that would hurt my loyalty to him as a follower of his teachings, not as his son. That could never be hurt, but as a follower of his teaching. Yes. Now, get back to your point.
Yes. No, the point was as you begin to evolve, and I mean, I think that you were in the position, you know, your father's private library.
Yes, sir, I was saying that in prison is when I had difference. And I'm, you know, a child is curious. So over the years, I'm curious, and I'm seeing things, I'm listening to things. I was a good listener, and I'm listening to things. And what I loved about the Islam my father was teaching was that he said Islam is freedom, justice, and equality. He didn't teach the Quran, he taught Bible, from the Bible, you know. And I believe the X also meant you're still a Christian. The X is a cross too. I'm in prison, and I'm recalling flaws in the so-called logic or rational teachings of the Nation of Islam. Serious flaws that contradicted logic, contradicted reason, sound reasoning, and all of this is bothering me. And I think at the time, during that time, even before I began serving my prison term, I was into other ideas. At one point, I was even thinking of communism. But when I read it, I said, the ideas that I like in communism, they're better. I like them better in the Temple of Islam. Yes. So I wasn't influenced to be a communist, but I was curious, very curious. So now I'm in prison, and I'm reflecting on the past, what I've been taught and everything. And I said to myself, I can't keep quiet about Mr. Farad being God. I'm in prison. I'm thinking to myself. I said, my daddy, you know, I call him daddy. I'm thinking to myself, so I call him daddy, you know. I said, Daddy said, Jesus Christ, a white man, is not God. He's not God. He's not the Son of God. I said, then he tell us, Mr. Farad is God. And he looks like a white man to every black man walking the streets that I walk. Mr. Farad looks like a white man too, you know. So in prison, I made up my mind that when I was released, I would never accept to identify with that belief that Mr. Farad is God in the flesh or incarnate. But when I got out, so I had to tell him. I said, because I don't accept Mr. Farad as God. I said, if Jesus Christ is not God, how can Mr. Farad be God? My father said, well, son, you are charged with not believing in our Savior. I said, Daddy, I say, I recognize him as your Savior. And he got angry right away. And he said, well, who is God then? Who is Allah? My father said to me. I said, Daddy, you know better than I do because you have the Quran. He didn't teach it. He was told not to teach it by his teacher, Mr.